Hello there, Alaskans, wherever you are. Welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show. Coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska. Where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started.
Welcome, everybody, to the Must Read Alaska Show. I'm your host, John Quick, coming to you live from somewhere in Alaska. I hope everybody's having a fabulous day today. Man, I came back from a quick trip down to Florida, and I came back to all the leaves on the trees, which is pretty awesome. I left, and there was still a little bit of snow in my house, came back, and looked like summer had finally happened. Summer and spring happened all in 1 week when I was gone. So that's pretty awesome. Well, we have a special treat today. We have a double header today. We have Representative Tom Mckay right now, and in a little bit we'll have Representative Jamie Allard. Representative Tom Mckay, man, you went down to Juneau and you fought specifically, I think, a lot for resource development. But without further ado, I want to welcome you to the Must Read Alaska Show.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and it's a privilege for me to be on today, Memorial Day, where we thank our fallen veterans for all their great sacrifice for our country. So I kind of feel that this is a special day. And when we finish our session this morning, I'll be going down to the park strip for the ceremony that starts at 9:30.
I love that. Today is a very special day. It's one of the reasons, we get to honor those who have gone before us and tragically sacrificed their life so that we can have a taste of freedom. And I think that that's something very special that we should continue to honor. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Tom, Representative Mckay, one of the things that I think folks saw on the tail end of session was just a crazy ending, right? Like sometimes there's a crazy start to session. It takes a while to get organized. Oftentimes we get a crazy ending. Walk us through, for folks that weren't there, maybe just caught a couple blurbs and reading something in the ADN or Must Read Alaska. Walk us through your perspective on what happened there at the end.
Well, Jonathan, the ending of the session had been staged and planned out ever since November after the election by the Senate. As you know, the Senate organized quite quickly after the election and 22, and they had a 17-3 majority, which is a substantially large majority. They unified. They had a 3-member minority that was hardly even placed on committees. And when they hit session in January, they had the outline of the budget, and everything that was going to happen was pretty well laid out by that group. So, as you probably recall, the House didn't fully organize until we got down to Juneau. We pulled in the Bush caucus basically to give us a majority. So we had a very thin Republican-led majority in the House, and we were going up against the Senate the whole time. So what happened at the end was, well, let me first say, we passed, according to traditional rules, we passed our operating budget over to the Senate on April 17th. That was roughly 30 days, a full 30 days before the end of the 120-day session. The Senate did not pass that budget back to us until I think it was just 1 day before the session ended, which basically violated all the traditions in the legislature. And for your listeners and for everyone, there's 3 sets of rules down there, basically. There's Mason's rule book, which is, the rules that we follow on the floor. And then there's our uniform rules. And then there's traditional rules. And what you learn as a freshman legislator and a sophomore legislator like myself is the traditional rules are not written down. And the traditional rules can be broken, and the Senate definitely did that. They held on to the budget till the very end. They gave us no time to work on a negotiated solution at the end. So what we ended up having to do was basically the governor had to call a special session, which would be normally 30 days. And we used one of those 30 days to complete the budget. And as you know, there was a big vote there, and there was, I believe it was 9 of us majority members that joined the House minority in voting to concur with the budget.
Mhm.
Now that created quite a firestorm in our caucus. There was a huge division about whether we should concur or not concur. And my logic and rationale for concurring was because the Senate told us very clearly, you can sit here for 30 days in a special session and we're not going to budge an inch. So my conclusion from all that was we were not going
and they had they have a super majority in their caucus.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We had run out of running room, Jonathan. If you can imagine the quarterback hands the ball off to the halfback,
Yeah.
and there's no offensive lineman blocking. He has nowhere to go, right? So he's basically going to have to take a knee. We had to, to me it was irrational and borderline hysterical to continue with very little to gain. We didn't have the 3/4 vote to go into the constitutional budget reserve to provide funding for a bigger dividend. The Senate knew that, and they stuck on their $1,300 dividend number. And my other reasons for voting yes was, the public hates special sessions. They think that we're down there just to collect per diem. So, and then the other thing is, you rarely get anything accomplished. The conference committee that would have been in place on the Senate side would have been Bert Stedman, Lyman Hoffman, and Donnie Olson.
Yeah, you basically just get much of the same.
Yeah, I mean,
stuff.
you're talking about a brick wall.
Yeah.
And with all due respect to those gentlemen, we would have just been in a very weak position. And my rationale, and I think the rationale of the 9 that joined was we're not gonna gain anything here in this 30 days. Now we could have went for a government shutdown, but the public hates that too. They think it's chaos. And they also don't care about our internal squabbles. If I come back to my constituents and say, well, the Senate was mean to me.
Yeah, that's,
they're just going to say, well, toughen up, Buttercup, and go back and try again, So the whole thing, I just said, I got to pull life support on this deal. Our caucus was badly split, arguing. Like I said, there was people that were borderline hysterical. They were irrational. They weren't thinking clearly. And I just said, I got to vote yes to get us out of here.
So
now,
what was the temperature like down there? Was it the Senate's being disrespectful to the House, or was it just like, well, you kind of outmaneuvered us?
They just outmuscled us, they're disrespectful. You can use all the adjectives you want to use. But it's hardcore politics. And, the conservatives, until we get more conservatives elected, which I'm dubious about with ranked choice voting, frankly, I don't see much changing. I could see this happening again. And the House majority is going to have to hold together, and we're going to have to go back down there next January with a pretty tough plan on how we're going to avoid being outmuscled by this 17-member majority Senate. And you don't have many tools available to you. It will be interesting to see what the governor does. He's got 20 days, I believe it is, from the time we voted, which was about May 18th, I believe.
Yep.
And it'll be interesting to see what he vetoes. He could possibly veto the whole thing and call us back and make us start over. And what I want people to understand is we are a bicameral legislature. There's the House and the Senate, and they're supposed to be equal. And the Senate did not treat us equally in the 120 days that we were down there. That's for sure. When it came to budget matters, and like I said, the general public, they're sort of like, well, go fix it. They don't want to be bothered with it, right?
Yeah.
They just want us to get our work done in 120 days, no special sessions. The internal squabbling, they would rather not hear about it, So that's our predicament. That's why I voted yes. I normally would have been a no vote. And I think in my district anyway, they don't like extremism.
Yeah.
My district doesn't they would not be happy with a government shutdown. So I guess that's pretty good encapsulation of how I looked at the whole situation, and why we needed to come home. And
Yeah, I think that
That's
there's,
it.
with any of that stuff, there's ups and downs. And ultimately, I think the Senate put the House in a very tough situation where
Yep.
you don't really have too many amazing options at that point. And I guess it's live and learn kind of thing. And I think you could just go with your gut, like you said. You, at the end of the day, you have to represent the people in your district. And I think your district, just like you said, is probably just, center right, and they don't want to see folks extreme
Yeah.
on either side. And at the end, and also, you have done a good, this year, I think Representative Mckay, I heard a couple of your conference committee sessions, and man, you don't hold back. There was one
You mean
session,
resource committee?
yeah, there was one session
Yeah.
where there was some engineer trying to I don't know, get on her little podium and talk down to you, and you weren't having none of it. So I think that even though it ended not awesome, you're still there for months representing Alaska, doing the best that you can to help resource development. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about this carbon situation where the governor's got a couple bills. I think one of them passed, or they both passed, about sequestering carbon.
Yeah, so it is a little complicated, and I don't want to, sound like, oh, I'm all a genius about all this, but there, at the beginning of session, there were two carbon bills submitted by the governor. One is for injecting CO2 into our depleted gas reservoirs in Alaska, which we have several. And that's called the carbon sequestration project, okay? And the slang term, easier to say, is carbon storage.
Yep.
So there's carbon storage, Jonathan. And then there's a completely different bill, was the tree bill. I call it the tree bill, which is where you set aside hundreds or thousands of acres of forest on state land that can be used for what they call carbon offsets, so that companies can have CO2 producing projects, but basically buy credits towards woodlands that would theoretically convert that carbon. So there was two different bills, two entirely separate bills. We worked on them extensively in House Resources. What's interesting about the carbon storage bill is we need that. We will need that if we ever going to build a gas pipeline, because you have to scrub out and do something with the CO2 on the North Slope before the natural gas gets shipped down a proposed pipeline to what is now referred to as Nikiski.
Yep.
So you need to be able to pump the CO2 into these depleted gas reservoirs, which we have plenty of those. We've got a lot of room for this CO2. So it's really quite simple. We have to have a framework so that the companies, whoever builds the pipeline, and the operators on the slope at Point Thompson and Prudhoe can inject the CO2 into these reservoirs. So that's what the carbon storage bill. Frankly, I thought it was quite simple. Our resources committee passed that out, and that went over to the Senate. And then, of course, the tree bill, we spent a lot of time talking about the tree bill, about how it's not tied to ESG, it's not tied to the World Economic Forum, it's not It doesn't lock up anything. You can still do all the activities in that particular plot of forest that you normally could do. And it actually, we we thought it would enhance things because you're actually encouraged to go in and manage the forest better. In particular, clean out beetle kill trees.
And some of these fees could pay for,
Yeah,
XYZ company now has to manage 10 million acres in the middle of
Yeah.
nowhere, and they have to manage it as part of that fee.
yeah. And so what do we do right now? Well, our forests, they catch on fire, and we just basically stand there and watch them burn.
Yep.
So the governor's argument was, let's at least get some value out of our stranded forests, and allow our companies, especially Alaska companies, ConocoPhillips, Hillcorp, Santos, whoever else that wants to participate in these programs. By the way, it was all voluntary. And the other thing to remember is the native corporation. There's some native corporations in Alaska and the mental health land trusts that are already engaged in these programs. So the state is actually behind the 8 ball and trying to catch up. So let me shift gears then. Those bills went to the Senate.
Yep.
And then the Senate did kind of a weird thing, but they actually passed the tree bill with some carbon storage aspects within it. So I kind of wish they'd kept them separate, because it gets confusing when you mix them together. Carbon storage and the trees are there's two entirely different things. Anyway, they mixed them together in one bill. I believe it was SB 48, which is the bill that the governor signed last week at the energy conference.
So if there's companies out there willing to buy these credits, is that a fair thing to say? These companies already exist around the world,
Yeah.
and we have the technology to pump this stuff into, what I'm guessing is underground empty caverns.
Well, you have gas reservoirs, like in Cook Inlet. There's depleted gas reservoirs, right?
Yeah.
They have tons of vacant pore space that you can inject this CO2 into, and likewise on the slope. So the other thing about a gas pipeline, Jonathan, and we're pretty excited because of the war in Ukraine, and because of some of the things that are happening in the Asia Pacific region. Suddenly Japan and South Korea are, I've been told, and this was mentioned last week in the energy conference, Japan and South Korea are becoming very concerned about their stable supply of LNG. And suddenly the Alaska pipeline for gas is looking at those two countries as potential very large customers, because Russia has basically alienated themselves because of the Ukraine war. And I'm also told that, oddly enough, Australia, who is a major exporter of LNG, has become so concerned about climate change, and they believe that climate change is real, that they're actually starting to decrease their export of LNG, which to me is,
it's like one of the cleanest forms of energy out there.
yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I worry about what's going on in Australia and New Zealand, as we saw during COVID, how they treated their citizens. But if they want to go out of that market, I think Alaska should say, "Hey, we're here and we're ready to do business." So the stars are maybe starting to get a little more aligned on a gas pipeline for Alaska because of these global geopolitical factors.
So this bill that the governor's passed, do you think that we could reap some benefits and rewards? Is this like 5 years or less, 10 years or less, a couple years or less? How quickly do you think that the state and some of these companies can, we can start seeing some revenue from this as a state?
I think at the absolute minimum, if you really fast track things, it's 18 months to 2 years. But since we're just getting started on it, my guess would be it might be a little longer than that.
And you touched base on it a little bit. You recently went to this energy conference, I think put on by the governor's office.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit about that. You had some celebrities there, Aaron Brockovich. You had the former mayor of Chicago there, who was, I think, Obama's former chief of staff too, or campaign manager, maybe both.
Rahm Emanuel.
Yeah. So talk to us about that conference for folks that maybe didn't go or haven't heard anything about it yet.
Well, Rahm Emanuel, as you just said, is former mayor of Chicago. He was Obama's chief of staff, which is a pretty powerful position. He's now the ambassador to Japan. and he's made friends with Governor Dunleavy. And of course, to be honest, he's a pretty hardcore Democrat. Mm-hmm. But he understands international politics, and he understands natural resources and strategic advantage. And he was a pretty strong advocate for Alaska exporting LNG to Japan and South Korea, and that we could, that would benefit the United States and let's say the free world. And so it was an interesting talk to have him up there with the governor, and like I said, bipartisan discussion, I guess you'd call it. And I look back, I remember when the Alaska pipeline was approved, the TAPS was approved by one vote, and you know who that was? It was Vice President Agnew, because it was a tie vote. It was 50-50, and Agnew cast the 51st vote to get TAPS built. So we barely had federal government permission to build TAPS way back in I guess it would have been the late 60s, early 70s. So here we are again, trying to get a gas pipeline, and it's a lot of challenges.
So do you think the LNG project happens? I mean, there's, we're going on year 20 or whatever. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
We have 600 million pages of paperwork and about that much spent already on engineering and FERC approvals and all that kind of stuff. So if you had a crystal ball, what do you think is going to happen big picture with the LNG project?
Oh, I'd hate to even speculate. I guess, there's several things have to come together. You have to have the buyers, the long-term contract buyers to buy gas. And then of course you have to build the project for the cost that you say you can build it for, which I think right now is $42 billion. It's the latest estimate. And then you have to have the producers on the slope agree to sell the gas and ship it down the pipeline. Now, I happen to be a petroleum engineer, and there's something that they call blowdown. And blowdown occurs in a oil reservoir that's late in its life, where it becomes more economic to sell the gas rather than use the gas to maintain reservoir pressure and get more oil out. Now, for example, Swanson River on the Kenai Peninsula is in blowdown. Mm-hmm. The gas is more valuable than the remaining oil. Now, when will Prudhoe Bay go to blowdown? That's a huge decision for ConocoPhillips, Exxon, and Hilcorp, the three principal owners of Prudhoe, plus the Alaska Oil and Gas Commission. They have to also approve when you make that transition. It's a huge decision. It's basically saying, Jonathan, we're going to leave the oil behind now.
Yeah. And
we're going to basically convert Prudhoe Bay to a gas field. So I don't know when that year will happen. We do have gas, of course, at Point Thompson, which could be the beginning of a pipeline project supply. And then the question is, when would Prudhoe go to blowdown? And those are huge decisions for those companies, because for obvious reasons.
Yeah. Well, our 20 minutes or so went by very fast, Representative McKay. I appreciate you
Wow, that was fast.
coming on the Must Read Alaska show. Any last minute things to share? Folks, maybe folks that live in your district are going to listen and they're, wondering, maybe somebody just moved in and they're wondering what's the easiest way to get a hold of you. Tell us all those kind of details and any last minute things you can think of. The mic is yours.
Well, thank you. We all have the Anchorage area legislators have offices in the LIO, which is located at Benson in Minnesota,
Mhm.
in what's called the Wells Fargo building. And you can just Google us, and I'm District 15, which is Bayshore, Campbell Lake, and Sand Lake. And I have one more session in my term, which should start in January. There is some talk that maybe we would go back in October for a special session on the long-term fiscal plan, which we haven't touched on that, Jonathan. But
Yeah.
I would just close by saying to folks that our state right now financially is we're headed towards a problem, because we're running out of savings. We're running out of accessible savings to fund government. And right now it's about 50-50, rough numbers, funding government from production down the pipeline and from our savings, primarily the permanent fund earnings reserve. So there's some really big decisions that are starting to come before us on how we're going to fund the government and what level of government do we want to have. And it's quite a difficult exercise with 60 people in the legislature to come up with some kind of unified plan that everybody can agree on, which would include taxes, spending cuts, a spending cap, and a protection of the permanent fund and the permanent fund dividend. Those four items come together like four, if you can envision 4 trains coming together from 4 different directions at high speed. And it's just going to be it's very difficult. And I can tell you that sometimes it's not a whole lot of fun, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the work you're doing, Representative McKay. I know that it can be daunting and draining, but I think it's a great thing that you're chair of the resource committee as somebody who's pro resource development. So I appreciate all the work you do. And
like I said at our beginning, the easiest solution to all these financial problems is more production.
Yeah. Well, that is it for time, folks. I appreciate you joining us. Representative McKay, you're welcome back on anytime. And for folks who want to help keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska, you can go to mustreadalaska.com. On the right-hand side, there's a little donate button. Every $5, $10, $100 helps keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska. We're not funded by some dark web nonprofit money conglomerate. We're just funded by everyday folks in Alaska who care about conservative news. So until next time, I'm John Quick from somewhere in Alaska. Thank you.